Dawson.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Dawson. Thank you very much for staying to this graveyard shift of the ReSIG Day. My presentation is about how exploratory practice can contribute to professional development. I don't know if you've ever felt like that as a teacher, but I certainly have. A few years ago, I felt that my teaching was like that it was very mechanical, that I was just going through the motions, that I was stuck in a rut. And I'd lost that sense of plausibility that Prabhu talks about in my teaching. And it was at that point that I decided to embark on a master's in TESOL at the University of Manchester. And I was working part-time as well, so I was teaching and studying, and got very interested in action research and went through a couple of action research cycles. And it was at a stage when I'd actually got a bit frustrated with what I was doing and had sort of lost my way a bit with it, that I went to a conference and met actually a couple of people in this room who were talking about exploratory practice. And I decided that I was going to find out as much as I could about exploratory practice from that moment. And I ended up writing my master's dissertation on exploratory practice. And this presentation today is really based on one part of that. So I'm going to very quickly look at professional development, explain the research study that I did, the people who got involved in that. I want to look at the reasons that drew them to getting involved in exploratory practice to start with. And then I'll explain how some of the things that they said linked to the 7 principles of exploratory practice, and just end with a few conclusions. So I think the thing about professional development is that nobody can do it to me. Only I can develop. They can train me, they can attempt to train me, they can attempt to educate me, but only I can develop. But the problem is I'm a teacher, I'm busy, I haven't got much time. And I think often I want the fast food version of professional development. I want that quick fix. So I'm happy to go along to that workshop or that training event if it gives me something that I can take into my classroom to deal with that difficult student or to teach academic noun phrases in an exciting way. And so what I decided to do, I like this quote by Johnson, because as teachers we don't always have time for that professional development. And she says that we do need to reclaim it for ourselves. And she talks about rights and responsibilities going hand in hand. And I think in our society we're often very hot on rights, but maybe not so much on responsibilities. And yet it's so true, isn't it? I do have a responsibility to develop as a teacher, both for my own sake, but also for the sake of my students. I need to become the best teacher that I can be. And exploratory practice was beginning to give me a way to do that in a very sustainable, very ongoing way. And so for my dissertation, I decided to find out what other people thought about exploratory practice and how it was helping them in their own professional development. Very briefly, just in case you've not heard of it before, this is the definition of exploratory practice from their website. It's based on 7 principles, and I'll look at those briefly in a minute. But I think they are embedded in that definition. So it's a way of teachers and learners coming together in a sustainable way, using everyday activities, classroom activities, to understand what's going on in the classroom. So this was a very small-scale study. I asked an understanding-based question. It was, why are you interested in exploratory practice? To a few people that I'd met at a conference, had contact with, and I did it by email. That was partly because of the time and distance that's involved in interviewing people. I have to admit as well that I really did not fancy all those hours of transcribing interviews. It's much easier if you just get an email sent to you. But also I think this quote by James is interesting in the sense that in an interview, the interviewer and the interviewee sort of co-construct the story between them. Whereas with email, you give people time and space to think about what you've asked them and to construct their own accounts in response to that. And the accounts I got were actually quite different. I just gave them that question and people responded to it. So I invited 7 people to participate, 6 replied. These are pseudonyms, but these are the people who replied. You'll notice that most of them are based in England. Most of them at the time were involved in higher education. The important thing is that they were all practitioners and they'd all expressed an interest in exploratory practice. Again, the time they'd been involved, Jenny was the veteran. At the time, she'd been involved for 15 years. Dave was a newbie. He'd only just discovered exploratory practice. So what drew people to getting involved? I think for Dave and Jenny, the reasons actually were very similar. Even though I've said Dave was a newbie and Jenny was a veteran at it, both of them express this. In fact, I think in Dave's case, it's almost an intellectual puzzling between action research and exploratory practice and how they were different, and that's what interested him in the whole thing. Jenny expresses that as well, but she talks about it in terms of the puzzle problem issue. I think we need to remember that she's talking when she first got involved, which is now like 17 and 18 years ago. And I think this puzzle and problem idea puzzle is now fairly common across much of the teacher research literature. And I think exploratory practice has maybe moved on to talking about being puzzled and puzzlement rather than just these two differences. Amy had a very different reason. She talked about seeing similarities in the context between what Dick Allwright was talking about, the work that was going on in Brazil, and the work in her own country. But what I find interesting about what Amy said is that she sort of couches it in problem-solution terms, because she said the situation in her country really worried her. That was the problem. And she was looking to find ways to improve it, and the solution, in a sense, was exploratory practice. And that might seem contradictory to the principles of exploratory practice, which are very much about understanding. But actually, this resonates very, very closely with my own experience of using it for the first time. And Amy goes on to talk about, and I think she's talking about using it as a critical pedagogy. She goes on after this to talk about the learners in her country, that they're very disempowered from disadvantageous parts of the country, and she thinks that this work for understanding can really help them to, empower them and help them to address the situations that they found themselves in. So I think she sees it as a sort of form of critical pedagogy almost. Yvonne had other reasons, and what I find interesting about this is her use of the word meaningful, because she wanted something that will bring her together with her learners in a meaningful way. And I think for me, certainly that's been one of the key things about exploratory practice. So these are the 7 principles. And what I want to do now is just look across the accounts at some of the commonalities between them and how maybe they link with these. So the idea, I've put principles 6 to 7 and 7 together under the idea of sustainability. I want to look very briefly at quality of life and understanding, and then finish with these 3 principles in the middle, which I've sort of put together as collegiality. So sustainability. 4 of the 6 people talked about sustainability, but not one of them mentioned the words sustainable or sustainability. So what I've done is put their excerpts into a Wordle, and a Wordle visualizes the frequency of the words that come up. And you'll notice that the biggest word there, the most frequent word, is this one down here, burnout. And we've also got burnt out here next to teachers. And that's almost I think it is the flip side of sustainability. And it was interesting that the way people talked about sustainability was very much on that opposite side. We've also got exploratory practice and action research, and it was interesting that they were linking those 2 together when they talked about these issues. So these are some of the phrases, collocations that they used when they were talking about this. So we've got burnout. There was the idea that things like action research, lesson study was also mentioned, can be quite formalised and one-off businesses that people maybe do while they're doing a master's or something like that on a specific teacher development programme, but they don't tend to carry them on after that. There was also the idea of extra stress and frustration associated with those things. And then someone said it was like the hunt for the philosopher's, or it could be like the hunt for the philosopher's stone. You kept trying to find solutions and didn't find the right one, and just had to keep going and going and going. And I think in the EP literature, you often get this idea of burnout and efficiency sort of linked together. And Allwright talks about a focus on quality of work, teaching efficiency, as sometimes leading to this idea of burnout and frustration. And this is how he talks about it. I think often teachers are under a lot of pressure for their students to perform. I think it's not just in terms of exams nowadays, it's often in terms of good student experience as well that you have to produce. And he talks about the opposite of that, or another way of looking at it, as being quality of life in the classroom, rather than a focus on work. And I suppose my question is efficiency always opposed to the principles of exploratory practice? And I think what Dave said is very interesting. I've called this an efficiency of understanding. He said, for example, if something is not working, I try out a multitude of solutions to see if I can improve upon it. This is action research. But if I go down the EP path of simply trying to understand the issue, this might mean that I can work more efficiently. Similarly, if the EP path means trying to understand why the solutions don't work, leads to more efficiency. And if EP means trying to differentiate between issues that can be improved by action and issues that can't be improved by action, this also leads to more efficiency. So I think he's here looking at efficiency, maybe still in terms of work, but trying to link it to that idea of understanding. And understanding actually is the most important thing here. You might think that, well, actually, he goes on to say after this, that understanding is always an achievable goal. And you might think that understanding, therefore, is a simpler or an easier way of doing things. And I think if you look at the second sentence there, he talks about simply trying to understand as if it was easier. And I've got these two quotes here, which I think sort of talk about this tension. So we've got Kurt Lewin, who I think is considered to be the father of modern action research, who says that unless you try and change it, you won't understand it. And then Sun Yat-sen, who's a Chinese revolutionary, who says that actually the hard bit is understanding. And once you understand what's going on, then it's easy to work out what you need to do about it. And one of the other respondents, I think, said something very similar to that. This is Paula. And she was talking about how understanding is often a very complex process. Understanding is very proactive. It's not just a passive thing. You need to work hard at understanding, which is what I think Sun Yat-sen is saying there. But she says often the outcome of that is just a few simple words. And that leads me back to this idea of quality of life in the classroom. And this is a quote by Dr. Elias Porter, who is an American psychologist, saying the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships. And there's a sort of cause and effect thing there. One determines the other. And I think we all know that relationships need work to make them work, don't they? A good relationship takes work. You can't just take it for granted. And I think it's the same in the classroom. And this is the way that some of the people expressed that idea of bringing life and relationships together. So someone said we need to break down those teacher-learner barriers and bring teachers closer to their learners. And the last one was the idea that exploratory practice respects the teachers' and learners' own decisions about what they're doing in the classroom. And I'd just like to conclude with this idea, this quote from Jenny, because I think this is certainly what I found as perhaps the most powerful thing in my own professional development, at least on that ongoing day-by-day, week-by-week professional development, is that including learners and teachers together as researchers it is radical and it is very, very powerful. And I think that brings us back to the idea of rights and responsibilities. That responsibility we have not just to develop ourselves, but also to help our learners to be the best learners that they can be. So that's the end. I don't know, I've got some references here. If anyone's got any questions.
Had to be me, didn't it? I just wondered if you had thought any more about this question. You started with the question of problem and puzzle. I wondered if you'd have any more thoughts about that as a result of what you're doing.
Between problem and puzzle.
Yeah.
I have actually. I think that there's that real desire in us to find solutions to problems, and it is. And when I've done EP with students, they jump very quickly to wanting to find solutions. They want to know how to improve their reading, how to improve their writing, how to do things. And what I do with them now, I say, look, I know you want to find solutions, but can we just for now just concentrate on trying to work out what's happening here and understand it? So we might look for solutions later, but for now, just to. I think we all do. In fact, I had students a couple of weeks ago who were working on this, and they put puzzles and solutions together, like that. And they said, it's easy. This is the puzzle, this is the solution. But somebody else in the class said, but that's for you. Not everybody sees it in the same way, and everybody has a different view on that. So I think it is very seductive, and I think you need to almost, it's a discipline to stop yourself from jumping to those solutions. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It's something that I found as well, that people jump to wanting to give you solutions. That it seems to me that solutions are very, very seductive, but actually it's not what we want. What we want, you can solve the problem without actually understanding why the problem starts, and I think that's what you're saying there.
Well, I think it goes back to that, doesn't it? You know, I'm not sure if I agree with Kurt Lewin, really. I don't know that you have to change something to really understand it.
Yeah.
I prefer the Chinese Revolutionary. That understanding is actually hard, and I think maybe that's, when you're working with students, maybe that's the problem, that they don't want to put that effort in. I'm not sure that I want to put that effort in always, you know, because it's easier just to think, I'll do that, see if it works, rather than really trying to understand what's going on.
Maybe you get both ways, because you can't understand anything.
No, that is true.
I was just thinking that, Richard just coined a word, I hadn't heard that before, exploratory action research. Because all these people want to, once you understand, you don't want to stop there. You understand the issue, and it has to be an issue. I mean, you have to be stimulated by some issue, intrigue, puzzle, intrigued by something. But then once you understand, you don't stop. Whereas exploratory practice, in its essence, says improvement is not the aim is to understand. But if we say, yes, we understand, and why do we need to understand? Because we want to go one step further. So exploratory action research is something I feel really useful, because otherwise we just stop.
Yeah.
And that's not what we as teachers are all about.
I'm not sure that you do always stop there. At least I haven't stopped
In
there.
terms of EP.
In terms of EP, well, I think actually, if you read the literature quite closely, it does say that understanding is first and foremost before change. So I don't think it's just, you've got to stop at understanding. You're not allowed to go any further. I think that would be a bit counterproductive, really.
In terms of focus, I think it focuses on understanding
rather
rather than change.
Yeah, not stopping.
No, not stopping, but in terms of focus, the emphasis, whereas action research starts with improvement, and then it says, how do we improve? It goes the other way.
And I think, sorry, you've lost your voice. I think there's a whole history in Rio of people using pedagogic techniques, not stopping, but using the teaching and the learning to develop their understandings.
Yeah, I think.
Actually, the whole issue of sustainability is that not to stop. But I know what you mean. It seems as if I understand it for the last, but it is
And understanding, you understand one thing, but maybe it opens up
exactly.
new directions that that you want to go in, that you don't understand.
There's never one understanding.
Yeah.
Understanding is.
Just very much as Katie was.
Yeah.
Does the literature say that always EPAR always stems from a problem?
EP doesn't.
It doesn't.
No, EP is much more
Or
about.
a problem or a puzzle.
Actually, what we
Yeah,
try
that's
to do is
the thing.
move away from the notion of problem or
Well, yes, that's what I
But
would
to
say.
say-
I think.
to
I don't
say
think
what's
exploratory
important
practice
is being puzzled. Well, is being puzzled.
Yeah, but it doesn't always have to come from being puzzled, doesn't it? Doesn't it also have to come from just, oh, I'm interested, I'll try that, or is exploratory practice always from a puzzle? Being puzzled.
I think it is something that's happening in your classroom, with your learners, that you're interested in finding out more about and understanding. And Judith talks about puzzlement and being puzzled. When I do this with my students, I usually ask them to write questions that begin with why, which is very much an exploratory practice sort of thing, because it distances you from that idea of sort of failure. I think if a student has to say, how do I improve my writing, or there's the sort of idea that I can't write well and I need to improve it, whereas why can't I remember my spellings? It sort of puts a different twist on it, and enables them to open it up more.
It doesn't have to be something negative.
Positive,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I was
Yeah.
saying. Because I was hearing.
Yeah.
Shouldn't all be negative. I
Oh,
think
no,
it should
no,
be
no, no.
Positive.
Yeah, or just something
You
that's
don't have to necessarily
interesting.
be puzzled by it. You
Yeah.
can just be interested by it.
Exactly.
Okay.
We had a mini kind of discussion about does it matter what the term is called? It's just the fact that you are open to something. So I think labelling things might actually hurt the process a little bit. So maybe, I'm just saying for me, just the fact that in your head you've decided to do anything in that way doesn't matter. I think labelling it might hurt it. I've got a question myself. The slide which had the radical was radical. Can you see that slide again? It had radical in it.
Radical.
Chinese.
I think it was Jenny.
Jenny.
Oh,
Sorry, it's forward.
that one. Radical,
Yes.
that one, the last one.
I just wondered how you react to people thinking it's radical and how it fits into just general approaches to research.
For me, what's radical is that it's the learners who are setting the agenda. So I think a lot of, certainly when I was doing some research, even as a teacher researcher, I sort of felt that I was targeting, my learners were the targets of my research, even though I was getting them involved. But this is them actually deciding, it's not my agenda, it's not what I want to find out more about, it's what they want to find out about. I think that's what's radical about it.
Yeah.
They're setting the agenda.
Yeah. I mean, they don't have to, because it can be a teacher agenda, and last week I wrote on my board in my classroom, because I was at the end of my tether actually with a group of students. I said, why are you here? Let's talk about it. What's going on in this classroom? So that was my puzzle really in that situation. They'd been given my co-teacher a really bad time, and it was like, what is going on? What is going on here? But when the learners begin to really look at what's puzzling them as well, I think that's what I understand Jenny meant by radical.
Can you suggest any more ideas for scaffolding their reflection or scaffolding this exploratory practice? Because presumably sometimes asking why is just not enough.
Would anyone like to? I know there's people here who have more experience of it than I have as well. So
I've never done it, but I'm asking myself, should you, or can they create their own scaffolding? I don't know. I'm suggesting that they involve them not only in the process of the theme, but also the method, the actual tools and methods as well. I don't know. I've not done it. I'm just. So maybe you could do better. You could get them to negotiate. Yeah,
I'm trying to too much.
Judith, we need to hear your voice.
I mean, Anna, you've done lots of exploratory practice.
Yeah, no,
I agree with you that once you give them space to explore, I mean, they will choose what they can, I suppose. If you work together and they work together, they come up easily with, with these kind of questions and ways of exploring them because it's natural. It's in all of us. When we're interested and we are puzzled by something, it comes natural to find ways of understanding, I think.
But
Music,
sorry, let me try to use guideline, what did you say, scaffolding, could be found in exploratory practice in the suggestion to integrate with the teaching, with the content, with what's supposed to be, because through oral presentations, as in her case, or whatever the case is, and we can't say, go do it this way or that way. So the idea of adapting normal pedagogic activities that are either the format or the theme, or even language, grammar, whatever, any exercise, any opportunity can be taken as way of understand, slightly adapted sometimes, which sometimes you as a teacher can adapt, such as an adaptation, or if you open up, they will be very fast at adapting it, and just, what about you, or why do you feel this is, somebody had a great example yesterday, it's just about opening it up. Oh, well, my nickname's there, it's the poster that I was presenting, which the people who were intrigued, the teacher and the teacher learners, heard many students calling each other bad names. Yeah. So it was a very bad nickname situation. And so the next subject that the teacher was supposed to teach was family. Mother, father, apostrophe S, all those things. So they went through that, and then instead of talking about, my mother's was big or not, my mother's nickname, they introduced the topic of nicknames very naturally, very simply. And that went on, they went on to talk about the way they call each other names and nicknames. And they ended up at what is sometimes considered radical, depending on the context, is that it shouldn't be taken extra time, but at the same time, it can be expanded. You lose, maybe your agenda or your issue, but it can take more and more time, which from our perspective is great. So again, it takes your creativity, and it's going to become homework or project or whatever. But then it went on forever for a class or two. They categorized their nicknames and they talked about it, and they came to an event at the university and presented it, and then asked people who were attending their poster, what is your name, what do they call you in your family, and how would you like to be called? You consider things. So there, it's sustainable. It went on, and they take it outside the classroom in a second.
I think that's what's very exciting is that there's actually no real need for scaffolding in that sense because it's not taking the place of it. It's what you would do normally anyway. And what I think was exciting for me and the teachers that I was working with, actually about this tomorrow, is wow, they have so much. One of the teachers that I quote over there, she says, I had no idea that they could do this until I gave them the space. I asked them the question, I gave them the space and just let go. It's very exciting.
It's fascinating because it totally runs counter to things like NLP or coaching or things like that. So reliant on asking the right question.
Yes. And the teacher controlling. Stepping back.
On the pedagogy, on the teaching and learning, which are essential things that are supposed to be happening in the classroom. It's not extra, it's part of it.
I don't know, I think if that's our time, I think it is. We want to get on.
Well, thank you, Susan. That was a great excellent today. Thank you to all of you for coming. That's the end of the research today. It's the beginning of the rest of the conference.